Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. But the least you could do is to watch our show, like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Dr. Ramzy Baroud. Dr. Baroud is an American Palestinian journalist and writer. He is the author of several books on the Israel Palestine conflict and the founder of news website Palestine Chronicle. Dr. Baroud, welcome to India and Global Left. It's an absolute honor to have you on.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's a quite a spectacular day in many ways. We are seeing Israeli trucks from Offer jail in the occupied West Bank moving on to different parts, but Ramallah, I guess, primarily releasing the Palestinian captives. On the other side, in the Knesset, we are seeing spectacular display of bootlicking, if you like, and obfuscation. And later in the evening, we have the meeting in Sharm el Sheikh, I believe, in Egypt, where apparently the future of Palestine would be discussed. In the absence of Netanyahu, of course, who don't want to discuss the future of Palestine, and also in the notable absence of Hamas. We'll get to all of these things, but I thought if we could start with uh, your connection with Palestine. Your family got displaced in 1948 during the Nakba. You grew up in, I don't know if it's multiple refugee camps, but you have connections with Nusrat refugee camp. If you can tell us your stories growing up in occupied Palestine, what it meant like, and what is the significance of today for so many Palestinians who are effectively refugee in their homelands, but also beyond their homeland.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for starting with this question. It's really quite critical because a lot of people tend to look at what's happening right now without fully appreciating the larger historical context. And for us, this is not history as an academic subject, it's history of the reality, which we live every single day. I'm a third generation Palestinian refugee. I'm not a refugee from Gaza. I'm a refugee from to Gaza, from today's the state of Israel, the historic state of Palestine. My family were driven out of their village in southern Palestine, along with somewhere between 700 to 800,000 Palestinian refugees who lived in this kind of perpetual refugeedom, if you will. They are all over the Middle East, all over Palestine as displaced refugees, and of course all over the world. I don't think there is a place in the world in which you do not find a Palestinian refugee. Now the thing is, the status of being a refugee for us has transcended the mere legal definition of what the term actually means to something far more loaded politically. We are refugees in the sense that I am keen on holding on my refugee status, even though technically I live in, mostly in the United States. I have a US citizenship. So why am I keen on introducing myself as a refugee? It is that identity, is that relationship with the past that makes our struggle carry a much greater and deeper meaning. Meaning that the moment that I will cease referring to myself as a refugee is the moment that accountability to Israel, from Israel, the Israeli war crime, the Nakba, which means the great catastrophe of 1948, which is the depopulation and the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population from historic Palestine in 1948, is the moment that we start the healing process. Now, some of us are more refugee than other, if you know what I mean. For example, Palestinian refugees in Gaza. They are not only suffering the fact that they are the descendants of a third or a fourth generation of refugees from the Nakba, but they are living the refugee experience in a whole different level. Genocide, besiegement, famine, and they have been also dislocated. They have also been removed and pushed from one area to the other, from northern Gaza to the southern Gaza to the central Gaza. I mean, some of my family members in Gaza have been basically pushed out or ethnically cleansed from certain areas over 12 and 13 times since the beginning of the war. So I cannot claim that my refugee status is at the same level of theirs because they live it in a whole different way. It's not a conceptual or an intellectual argument. It's a matter of their very survival. Now you have also refugee camps in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria, previously in Iraq until quite recently, and so forth and so on. Without addressing the issue that made Palestinians refugees as a nation, then everything that is being discussed right now, all the political discourses regarding the Middle East, at least in mainstream thinking, mainstream media, mainstream politics, and mainstream academia, I think they're just frivolous. And they will, ignoring that fundamental issue, ultimately means kind of coming back, pushing the reset button that got us back to where we are today, the genocide and the famine and all of that. It takes a great deal of courage, a great deal of intellectual honesty to address the roots of the problem. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves back to this very tragic moment.
I'll come to some of these larger issues that this first phase of the ceasefire, as it is told, it completely ignores and is silent. But if we could start with your thoughts on what you are seeing today. I mean, even for me, who is not even remotely connected to Palestine in any direct way, apart from my reading and coverage in the recent years, I was quite moved by some of the images and stories and videos that have come today in particular, but we've been seeing this for a few days. Palestinian captives coming out of Israeli jails with signs of victory, even though Israelis have constantly threatened today to mute their celebration, to mute the solidarity, to mute any kind of gathering. There have been raids at the homes of Palestinian captives who have been released so that they are silent. Some would be released abroad. I just wonder what your thoughts are as you, as a refugee, as you just described, are reading this news.
Right. So there is the elephant in the room in all of what is happening right now, that for some reason everybody is ignoring it. If you look at Arabic media, for example, forget about Western mainstream media. It's a lost cause anyway. But even if you look at Arabic media, some of them are supposedly sympathetic with the Palestinian people. You're going to find that everybody is kind of thanking or trying to accentuate and center the role of the government in this ceasefire. The Egyptians, the Qataris, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and so forth. But in actuality, the elephant in the room is the Palestinian people. I mean, they are the ones who made all the difference. It's the resilience of the Palestinians. The outcome of this resilience is the resistance of the Palestinians. These two issues are intrinsically linked. And we don't talk about them. We don't talk about them because we are scared of talking about the resistance to begin with. God forbid, even in the left, in Western circles, they are also scared of talking about it because they don't want to be seen as sympathetic of a certain group that is perceived in a certain way in Western society. But in actuality, if it were not for the resilience of the Palestinian people as a collective, and the byproduct of that resilience is the resistance of the Palestinian people in Gaza, none of this would have happened. Let's just imagine a scenario, just for the sake of an intellectual exercise here, just a scenario in which the Palestinians did not resist, did not fight back. What would have been the outcome of this now, this moment 2 years later? Israel would be whining, and the Israeli soldiers would be whining and dining in Gaza as we speak. There would be already some of the settlements would be in the process of construction. Israeli military camps would be safely available in every part of Gaza, and at least half of the Gaza population would have been ethnically cleansed completely. But that did not happen. The question is, why did that not happen? Did the Americans stop it? No, of course not. It's the US that sustained the genocide. The artillery, Trump is lining up to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, how pathetic is this? Yet he is the one, along with Biden, kind of continuing the legacy of Biden and others before them. They are the ones who have sustained the Israeli killing machine. Is it Egypt? Is it the Emirates? Who is the one that stopped this war? It is the steadfastness. In Arabic, we call it sumud. steadfastness of the Palestinian people. Now, the term sumud, steadfastness, has always been kind of relegated, if you will, to become something of a kind of sentimental, intellectual value. It's not something that we measure in a political sense. But now suddenly it's actually a political value. It is the patience, the power, the struggle of the Palestinians that allowed this moment to happen. And what an incredible moment. I mean, 77 years since the establishment of Israel, 100 plus years since the Balfour Declaration, 100 plus years since the so-called British mandate in Palestine. We have never seen Palestinians, through their resistance, able to create a decisive political outcome. We need to reflect on this. We need to, I think intellectuals and historians, especially honest ones, are going to be spending a lot of time trying to unravel and unpack the meaning of this moment. All Arab armies could not impose on Israel anything. Israel always, with the help of the US, of course, never on its own, and the help of other Western powers, always managed to get what it wanted. Always. In terms of using military power to create political reality and to shape political reality, but not in Gaza. And you would say, well, wait a minute, the Gaza army, maybe this powerful entity, right? They are kids, kids who are manufacturing their weapons from the munition that the Israelis dumped on Gaza, and it was not and did not explode. So this is really not about military. So this whole idea of we need to disarm the resistance, you can't disarm the resistance, not because it's not practically possible. You cannot disarm the resistance because the weapons of the resistance is not an arsenal that can be checked and labeled and removed and so forth. It is just weapons that people create, in the spur of the moment to fight the enemy that is coming to invade and kill and rape and carry out a genocide. So to see all of these things, I know there are still thousands of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. I know that. And I also know that it is really difficult to even use the word celebrate or feeling triumphant or victorious while the skulls of thousands of people are still buried under the rubble of Gaza, in addition to the nearly 7,000 people, or 80,000 with those who are missing, that have been killed in Gaza. Nearly 250,000 people, that is confirmed, between dead and wounded and missing. We don't know. The scientists and doctors are going to be doing a whole different type of study to actually tell us how many people died in Gaza. So using words like celebration and triumph and victory, we have to be very careful and measured in the way we use it. But if you actually see it within the larger context that you had the US, the greatest military power on earth today, with Israel, the greatest regional power that has absolutely no shame whatsoever of killing, raping, doing whatever it takes, even bombing American allies like they did in Qatar. They have no fear of consequences because the US is always there to kind of back them up. You saw the Arabs and the Muslims, some of them are lining up. I mean, there has been some, not rumors, some confirmed rumors that a country like Indonesia, for example, was willing to accept 200,000 Palestinians ethnically cleansed from Gaza. I mean, so the Arabs are actually either watching from the margins or completely on the side of Israel. Yet somehow the Palestinian refugees or the Palestinian people of Gaza remain in Gaza. They still manage to get nearly 2,000 prisoners out of prison, and they still managed to break the siege. And they did it all on their own with the international solidarity of ordinary people, civil society, not government, not anything of that sort. I mean, I'm hesitant, but I have to say that this is a great victory for all oppressed nations, not only in the Middle East, but worldwide.
You refer to even non-Western media not or not questioning this framework of demilitarizing Gaza or demilitarizing Hamas. And I'm thinking about Al Jazeera, who does so much in the name of Palestinians, but they have barely questioned this idea that has been floating around and have been taken up unquestionably in the West, that Hamas should be demilitarized, that Hamas should surrender. If you could talk a little bit about of course, it's principally wrong to talk about demilitarizing a resistance. The West is also completely silent about the gangs that have been floated by the Israelis and Americans in Gaza Strip to loot the aid. Repelling of which is very critical for a state to exist, and Hamas, not just Hamas, but all the other parts of the groups of the resistance, including the PFLP, Islamic Jihad, Alaska Brigade, etc. If you could tell us the significance of armed resistance, because what we saw during the 90s, during the process of Oslo, was that, of course, the Palestinian leadership agreed to give up armed resistance for a while the occupied West Bank was completely pulverized with checkposts, with making it a grazing ground for the Israeli occupation forces. Many are fearing similar kind of trajectory going forward. Talk about your concerns around this idea of Hamas should giving up weapons.
I'm going to jump to the very end and I'm going to kind of go backward. And the very end is, as a historian who have studied Palestinian resistance movements from the late 1940s, so almost immediately after the Nakba, and early 1950s, during what we call the Fidaiyin movement in Gaza, all the way until today, I can tell you with total certainty that there would be no demilitarization of Palestinian resistance. Let's just put this subject out of the way. And I will explain this why this is the case in 1 second here. The other thing regarding the Palestinian Authority, I mean, the thing about the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and agreeing, I mean, remember what happened with Yasser Arafat. Forget about Mahmoud Abbas for a minute. I mean, the man has no sense of nationalism. He doesn't even feel Palestinian. Like you almost feel like there's a sense of shame in him, when he speaks about the Palestinian struggle or the Palestinian resistance. I mean, he spoke about Palestinian resistance in the past. I think it was in 2004, where he referred to it as useless. And imagine the families of the martyrs of Palestine. When you tell their families that your resistance and their kids' resistance is useless, completely canceling out his own people. But let's just talk about Yasser Arafat for a second. When Yasser Arafat wanted to engage, Yasser Arafat was desperate to engage with the Americans. He wanted to talk with the Israelis indirectly in Oslo years before the Oslo Accord was signed in 1993. But before that, he wanted to engage with the Americans first, and the Americans agreed to talk to him in Tunisia. And they gave, I can't remember the name of the guy, just a low-level, low-key American diplomat agreed to speak with the PLO in Tunisia, and the PLO presented this as one of the greatest achievements for the Palestinian struggle. And we know what happened at the end of the day. It ended up being a complete charade, a sham that sold out the Palestinian cause in order for the PLO to be recognized by Israel. But the Americans insisted that in order for Yasser Arafat to be engaged, he has to jump through so many hoops. And he did. And he spoke initially that we are ready to accept UN resolutions 242, 338. We are ready to acknowledge Israel's right to exist. But they insisted that he still needs to condemn Palestinian armed resistance. And he did. And the way he phrased it is even worse. He condemned all sorts of violence and terrorism. So basically, canceling out everything, all the armed resistance in the Palestinian history, from the days of Izzeddin al-Qassam in the 1920s and 30s, all the way until that specific moment. And what did Arafat get out of it? Absolutely nothing. To the contrary, they were given arms. The Palestinian Authority has more arms than all Palestinian resistance groups, Islamist, secular, or socialist in Gaza. But the arms are actually being used to protect the Israeli settlements. The arms are being used as a line of defense for the Israeli army. And the arms are being used to suppress the Palestinian people. It's not the question of arms. It's the questions of how these arms are being used. So no, the Palestinian Authority or the PLO was not disarmed and did not demilitarize. They are militarized and they are armed. It's just the arms are not being used against the oppression and the occupation and the apartheid coming from Israel. On the other hand, in Palestine, back to the original point, the Fidaiyin movement in the 1950s in Gaza did not have ideological background. They were not socialists, they were not Islamists, they were not anything. The Islamic movement, by the way, did not even start in Palestine in earnest in terms of actual struggle and resistance and armed resistance, not until the first Palestinian Intifada after 1987, And even then, really largely symbolically. I mean, there were four guys when the Al-Qassam started. And by the way, Al-Qassam movement started from the very refugee camp in which I was born, the Nusayrat refugee camp in Gaza. And I remember when they first read their statement on the ancient graveyard of the Nusayrat by Al-Qassam Mosque, they came and they read their statement, and we were all kind of scratching our heads. Who are these people? They're not dressed like the socialists. They're not dressed like Fatah. We did not who they were for a while. It took them years and years to start building this kind of guerrilla army, if you will, that became Al-Qassam Brigade. But the question here is, therefore, the question is not about Hamas or the PFLP. The question is that resistance in Gaza in particular, throughout Palestine, but Gaza in particular, has been a continuum. And it's not even ideologically linked. It's not even, it's just a group of people who are oppressed, and they are finding every possible way of fighting back. And it's also not fair to reduce the entire resistance of the Palestinian people to armed struggle. In my opinion, this is just a mere expression of numerous facets of resistance. When a woman, for example, takes her surviving child and goes back to northern Gaza, so insistent on rebuilding her home, finding the bodies of her sons and her husband and her daughters and burying them, and saying, I'm going to raise this child to carry the flag of Sumud and to fight, and not fight in the physical sense, but to remain in Gaza. And I refuse to be ethnically cleansed. And I would rather put my tent on top of my house and live there until I die. That's an act of resistance. This is what we don't talk about. This is what we don't talk about. Even historians, classical historians who look at the issue, at the history of Palestine purely from, in terms of important dates and events, from Balfour to the Nakba to the Naksa and all of that, nobody talks about this lady. This lady as a representation of millions of Palestinians. That's where we Palestinians bring our resilience and our struggle, our continuity, our prolonging this fight that finally managed to defeat Israel, not only in the battlefield, but managed to defeat Israel for the first time, in proving to Israel that firepower alone does not win war. And now the question is, will there be enough wisdom to actually receive and digest and react to this message? Or are we going to go back as if nothing has happened and just continue to devastate Gaza and kill more and more Palestinians?
One of the questions fundamental of everything else is the Palestinian statehood and massive change in or massive awareness during these 2 years of genocide about the Palestinian issue has shifted global opinion massively. Or maybe global opinion was always shifted, but more and more people have joined it, and there is a change in the Western imperial core we have seen, and that has made countries like France, Britain, Canada, and others to formally recognize the question of Palestinian statehood, which the global majority has always recognized. On the other hand, President Trump's plan, which everyone, most of the European leaders are thanking him, and the whole Knesset drama today is based on bootlicking Trump about this success. Not a single word about Palestinian statehood. In that 20-point so-called peace plan, the last point says that if everything goes as per plan, we would make arrangements for the Israelis and the Palestinians to come together and talk. Talk about the significance of the Palestinian statehood struggle, and what should the global majority, how should we continue our struggle apart from those who are on the ground?
It is back to the carrot and the stick. I mean, this has been going on for such a long time in our history. I mean, we grew older just talking about it, of how they always present these two options. The good Palestinians who behave themselves will be rewarded at the end of the day of some, illusion of a Palestinian state. None of this is related to the Palestinian state. None of it. Because a Palestinian state would have to be an outcome of the Palestinian struggle, the genuine Palestinian struggle itself. This state is some kind of a distraction created to pacify the global community that is rising for Palestine. Mustafa Barghouti is one of our greatest intellectuals, was in South Africa recently. And I heard him talk the other day. He said that he was told by some of the comrades of Mandela and the apartheid movement warriors back in the day, he said, what is happening right now in terms of global solidarity with the Palestinian is by far greater than the height of the pro anti-apartheid movement globally. So there's a lot of fear that this global solidarity is translating to something frightening, to completely change, kind of pushing into a paradigm shift, completely isolating Israel, turning Israel into a pariah state, and it is, by the way, very, very close to being a complete pariah state, and to actually center the Palestinians as the most important global subject and struggle anywhere around the world, and indeed this is what's happening. So the whole idea of a Palestinian state, and by the way, I mean you must have seen how any reference to a Palestinian state, as the United Nations itself, has decided, is always covered with all of these conditions. It's demilitarized. Hamas cannot be part of this and this and that. So it's kind of like stripped from any agency. Like I'm gonna give you state, but I'm gonna take all of your agency away from you. What do I want the state for? What's the point of that state? So, but I really feel like it's like a magician. If you are a good magician and you are trying to perform a trick, you want to create a distraction somewhere else so that people do not see how you actually performed your trick. And the trick here is trying to save Israel. They are more keenly on saving Israel than helping the Palestinians. And so that's the element of the state. But at the end of the day, what is going to make the difference in all of this, what is going to actually resolve this so-called conflict, is exposing Zionism for what it is. I don't care what you call this at the end of the day. If you manage to expose Zionism and manage to isolate Zionism and to defeat Zionism as an ideology that is rooted in violence, in ethnic cleansing, in genocide, in racism, in apartheid, if you do that, and then you have a country or a nation that does not necessarily think that bombing innocent children is always the solution to, out of its problem. That genocide is actually should not be an option, should not be on the table. That bombing Syria and Lebanon and Yemen and Iraq and Iran and everybody else is not politics and it's not diplomacy, it's just criminality. Once you isolate and defeat Zionism, I think the issue of solution becomes a natural outcome of the change that is going to happen. So they can talk about a two state. You know what? They can also talk about a one state as long as they want to. Is not going to make the desired difference as long as Israel is allowed to carry on with this Zionist, isolationist, racist ideology that has devastated the Middle East for the last 100 years.
There is the question about, I'm coming to the sort of short-term issues, maybe not short-term, but issues that are being discussed now, and evaluate them in the context of these long-term structural issues that you have raised. One of the questions is the question of reconstruction. Of course, European countries are now announcing packages, with great exuberance, while we haven't heard of anything substantive about who will control the going in of aid. The question that we discussed earlier, that even to make an effective use of aid, we need a state, we need security. In the absence of this, and Israeli army is not, the occupation is not even vacating from Gaza itself. It is still occupying 50% of Gaza itself. And even the final stage, and correct me if I'm wrong, they have not agreed to move beyond what they are calling as the buffer inside the Gaza. And this is over and above the occupied West Bank, which has become all kinds of grazing ground for the occupying force. Talk about what should be a framework to discuss the immediate post-genocide reconstruction, assuming Israel is not going to start genocide again, which there is no guarantee because many analysts are saying that this is just a framework for captive exchange and they may any day start a genocide. But if there is a stop to the genocide, what does reconstruction mean from a progressive perspective?
Right. So even though genocide in its current form has stopped and hopefully stopped for at least for a long time for people to heal and recover a bit, the torment of the Palestinian people, I'm afraid, in Gaza particularly, is not going to stop. And we know that because we know Israel, and we know particularly Israel's behavior towards Gaza. Gaza has been under a perpetual Israeli siege from the very, very start. From 1948, Gaza, even though it fell under Egyptian administration, was never really a free place where people could just go and come as they please. There was always restrictions, there were always problems. But after 1967, Gaza has fell under a horrendous Israeli siege. I was born and raised in Gaza, and I just, I mean, we lived in a box. We couldn't, in order for me, for example, to go to my university in the West Bank, Birzeit University, I needed to have at least 4 or 5 different Israeli ID cards, a permission to get out of Gaza, a permission to cross the Erez checkpoint, a permission to go from the Erez checkpoint to the West Bank, a permission to enter the West Bank, and a permission to stay in the West Bank. And that was during the time in which there was supposedly no siege on Gaza. So
This was prior to the
imagine when we
90s. This was prior to the
exactly,
90s.
exactly. Now imagine when we Palestinians refer to what's happening in Gaza as the siege of Gaza, knowing the standards under which we lived in Gaza, then you can imagine how hermetic this siege is and has been. So I don't think the siege is going to be lifted on Gaza. To the contrary, I think because Israel failed to defeat Gaza militarily, we know that, there's no question about it. Israel is now going to try to bargain and to capitalize on its control of certain areas of Gaza and control over the Philadelphia line separating Rafah from Egypt and control of the various other access, Erez checkpoint, Karim Abu Salim checkpoint, and so forth and so on, to control everything that goes inside and outside of Gaza. And they have done this since 2007. This particular hermetic siege, where the Haaretz newspaper, the Israeli newspaper, came with a report, a leak that actually showed that the Israelis have been counting calories, knowing how many calories do a Palestinian need to barely survive and not die. And they actually were counting calories. And again, that was before the siege. Imagine now, I think the control mechanisms are going to be far tighter, far greater. And Palestinians are going to suffer a great deal as a result. And they are hoping that the issue of construction and food and medicine is going to be directly linked to putting pressure on the Palestinian resistance in Gaza to disarm. But again, I tell them this is not going to happen. We've been through so much hardship that you can't even imagine, and most people don't fully understand. I mean, they understand more or less what has been taking place in Gaza in the last 2 years, but a lot of people don't know what's been going on in Gaza in the last 77 years, and extreme circumstances, and yet people did not give up. The other issue is that of the actual process of construction. Gaza is a communal society, okay? They are not, unlike Israelis who lost some of their homes in the war with Lebanon, with Hezbollah and others, they're not going to be placed in five-star hotels waiting, for the companies, German designers, the French designers versus the Israeli companies. Which one is going to offer the best possible, the villas and the houses and the swimming pool? In Gaza, we don't have any of this. We are a communal society. So what do we do? I mean, my house in Gaza, which has now been destroyed entirely, along with all of my family homes in Gaza, my house in Gaza started many, many years ago as a single room with no bathroom. And it has expanded with time to a second, a third, and a fourth bedroom. And it became a big house, still a refugee house, but a big house before it was destroyed. We have never paid a dime for building that house. You want to build something, the neighbors come, the relatives come, the friends come. I think, I mean, Gaza is gonna surprise all of us in its, ingenuity of trying to rebuild, because the community is gonna jump in there. The community is gonna help. People will build their own houses, and you say, well, where will the concrete come from? Look at previous wars. Israel was not allowing cement into Gaza. How did they rebuild? I was in Gaza in 2012, and I was so surprised that after the war of 2008 and 9, and after the war of 2012, and all the bombings that happened, I only saw few destroyed buildings in Gaza. What happened? Thousands of homes were rebuilt. They took the concrete of the destroyed building, they crushed it, they reprocessed it, and they used it to build the same houses, the same schools, the same mosques and churches, and the same universities all over again. They are extremely durable and resilient people. They will do it as long as the genocide stops.
This reminds me of some of the things written in Sarah Roy's book. She writes beautifully on some of these aspects of political economy in Gaza, and how frugally resources are utilized and converted into things that are meaningful for the people. I wanted to quickly ask you a little bit about the divisions within the politics of the Palestinian movement, given you are an insider in so many ways. We have seen, of course, different attempts of bringing the different factions together, some at international level, like the Beijing summit. The others, many are saying that the genocide has caused unity between different factions in so many ways. As an insider, how do you look at these divisions within the Palestinian movement, and how can we overcome some of these divisions within ground to strengthen the movement?
Okay, this answer might surprise you a little bit. I actually don't think there's any division. It's all about how you define the term division. The Palestinian people are more united than ever. The Palestinian nation is more united than ever. Yes, we do have our classes, and we do have class interests, and we have class conflicts. Absolutely no question about it. But for some reason, because of the enormity of the genocide, we are actually finding Palestinians from all backgrounds, rich and poor, somehow unifying around the idea of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian nation, and even Palestinian resistance. There was a poll that was conducted, about a year or so into the war, and it was conducted from Ramallah itself. I cannot remember if it was the Shakaki Center or some other polling company, but basically it shows that there is greater support for resistance in the West Bank than in Gaza itself. I think this is, I mean, by itself should tell us where the Palestinian people are standing. But then we kind of go into another issue, and that is the Palestinian Authority. If you think of the Palestinian Authority as a component, an organic component of the Palestinian people, then I would say, yes, definitely our people are disunited. But they're not. They are now operating in a completely different political landscape. They have been used by Israel as a way to basically provide some sort of a buffer between the Israeli occupation and the Palestinian people. And throughout the last 2 years, I mean, not only, which is just particularly devastating, did they not take any action or develop any strategy to show support for Gaza. And by the way, Gaza has always been there for everyone. Most of the rebellions in Gaza were always a response to an event that happened in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So there is a deep feeling of, I don't want to elaborate too much on this, but many of us are already feeling it. We expected a lot more, and that did not happen. But on the other hand, they
Even
oppressed
today, just sorry, even today, as the Israeli prisoners were being moved out of Dar al-Balah and Khan Yunis, the Palestinian captives were released in occupied West Bank.
and
Just to
and they have been told, by the way, to don't say a word. So this time around, the Palestinian security, some of them are masked, waited for them outside the buses, rushed them into the cultural palace of Ramallah. And whenever Al Arabi or Al Jazeera or some other journalists tried to talk to them, some of them would say, we've been told not to say anything. I mean, to that extent, right? So I don't know what are the margins that would allow the Palestinians to find political unity with the Palestinian Authority. And by the way, if you don't rise for your people during the time of genocide, the genocide has been the litmus test for everybody, for every activist, for every socialist leftist group, for every government, for every civil society, but also for the Palestinians themselves. If you did not rise in the last 2 years to take a moral stance for Palestine, there will never be that opportunity again, because genocide is not a thing that happens every other day. So many people have missed the opportunity of taking the most powerful and needed and critical moral stance. Thankfully, millions upon millions of people used that opportunity, took that stance from Rome to Madrid to the US to India, to China, everywhere in the world, a lot of people stood up and took that moral stance. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority didn't. So, how do we envisage a future in which this authority that is being trained and armed by Israel could potentially be part of some kind of a Palestinian political fabric? That said, that said, I think the Palestinian Authority, which I mean, right now there's so much focus by the Arabs, but even by the US itself, to try to revive the PA, because they feel like we cannot do business with Hamas, obviously, because there are two, you know, doing business with Hamas essentially means the defeat of our project, and it's a threat to the various regimes in the Arab world. So as a result, they want the next best thing, and that is the Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinian Authority has no legitimacy amongst Palestinians, especially in Gaza. They can't stand it. In fact, many of the criminal gangs that worked with Israel in Rafah, in Khan Yunis, in northern Gaza, Beit Hanun, many of them were actually, some of them openly affiliated with the Palestinian Authority. So how do you actually achieve any kind of national unity with them? I still hope that there can be some kind of a national unity around the concept of around Gaza. Who can possibly disagree about the steadfastness and resilience and the injustices that happen in Gaza, around the resistance? And by the resistance, I'm not talking to any specific faction. I think we need to separate between factions and resistance. Factions may carry out the resistance, but resistance has been there for decades before Hamas and will be there for decades after Hamas, and so on. So there are so many points of unity that we Palestinians can build a new Palestinian discourse around. Let's not squander this historic moment, especially that the world is already behind us, already united in support of this specific discourse.
Uh, if we could turn the gaze a little bit towards the end, towards Israel, we have seen throughout the course of this genocide quite an ugly part of Israeli society. I'm carefully using my word society because generally within the left, we make a sharp distinction between the state and the ruling elites on one hand and society at large. I mean, that's the general framework of things. But in the case of Israel, it seems to me that almost large sections of the society itself turned genocidal. What is the future in store for the Israeli society post-genocide? Of course, there would be great divisive politics. Even in the Knesset, we have seen the opposition standing up when Trump was talking, but they didn't stand up against Netanyahu. These divisions are, of course, superficial when looked at from the Palestinian perspective. But as a Palestinian, when you look at this a genocidal society, let's not mince our words, what are your thoughts on Israel going forward?
I'm really glad you asked this question, because I think many, even within the pro-Palestine movement, sometimes get confused about the standing and the role of Israeli society. Especially prior to the genocide, you saw the mass mobilization in Israel against the so-called judicial reforms in Israel that they were trying to, being imposed by Netanyahu. And a lot of people kind of use this opportunity to promote democracy in Israel. This is a democratic society that is rising against oppression and fascism and dictatorship. And sadly, a lot of people on the left kind of jump on this movement, and they start creating these weird kind of moral equivalence between extremists on both sides and the peace lovers on both sides. I think this genocide is the end of it. It's the end of this illusion. I've been writing about this illusion for many years. Many Palestinian writers and historians have been trying to awaken everybody that don't mix, don't adopt these terminologies left and right and center in Israel. They are relevant to specific policies within Israel itself, but they do not measure up to the global definition of what being a leftist and what being a right wing in Israel. As far as we are concerned, they've always been right wing, they've always been fascist. In the beginning of the genocide, there were like news. I can't remember the name of the human rights group that wrote about it, but they spoke about how Israeli civilians being allowed to witness the torture of Palestinians in northern Gaza by the Israeli army as a way to kind of heal, to overcome the shock of October 7. We saw poll after poll of the most incredible numbers. 82% of Israelis were supporting the ethnic cleansing of Gazans out of Gaza, right? Considering the fact that there are millions of Arabs, Palestinian Arabs living in Israel, that really more or less tells me 100% of the population was supporting of the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians following the genocide. Well, half of the Jewish Israeli population wanted to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens since 1948. This is not a society that is ready for any kind of peace. And we have to really stop, as you said, we need to stop mincing our words and we need to face the reality. I'm sorry to say it, but this is a sick society. You cannot sustain what has happened in Gaza over the last 2 years and not be a sick society. And the only way for this sickness to stop is pressure from outside. Ilan Pappé, Israeli professors, but many others who have been saying it, that change will never happen from Israel itself. The change should happen from the outside. Palestinians are doing their part of facing up and confronting this Zionism and this racism and this awful sickness in Israel. But the rest of the international community needs to remain focused on holding Israel accountable through boycotts, through sanctions, practically by making Israel a pariah state. That's what ended the sickness, more or less, in apartheid South Africa, and that's what's going to end the sickness in Israel as well.
Does the shift in the West in particular this time make you hopeful?
There is a conflict. There is a huge conflict in the West. We haven't been talking about it a lot because we did not want to appear during the genocide that we are trying to create division in what type of solidarity that we are looking for. So we would welcome anyone raising a Palestinian flag in Rome, in Paris, in Madrid, in Washington, D.C. But let's be honest here, there is a division. There is part of the pro-Palestine movement that is still adhering to the same old language. Some of them are actually concentrated around the Palestinian Authority, still talking about the good Palestinians and the bad Palestinians, still conditioning their support. I hate Hamas, I love this and that sort of thing. But then there is a new movement, and I think it's a youthful movement. It's young people-centered movement. I think it's being fed by the power of social media, podcasts like yours, that speak the right language. They are not scared. They are not scared to stand up for the Palestinians and point the finger and hold Israel accountable. This is the kind of movement we need to build. I think this movement is already underway in countries like Spain and Italy, but we need to see it everywhere. I think if this movement is indeed the one that would eventually start speaking on behalf of the solidarity movement, then we could indeed have the kind of achieve the needed critical mass to hold Israel accountable and to finally help the Palestinians, who are at the front line of the struggle, help the Palestinians achieve their freedom.
And quickly, what's your sense of the future of the Arab world insofar as the Palestinian national cause is concerned. Of course, segments of the Arab world we have seen have made the greatest sacrifice. I'm thinking about Hezbollah. I'm thinking about Ansar Allah in Yemen. But we've seen very muted response from the negotiating countries, Qatar, Israel, and excuse me, Egypt, and later Turkey, although they are probably not part of the Arab world. But the Arab world has largely traded off the Palestinian cause for their own security. They have stopped offending events, let alone pushing back the US empire and the Zionist empire. What is your sense of their future?
This is one of the most shameful moments in the history of the Arab world. The Arab world as a political entity, not as a culture. I don't care so much about that, but as a political entity that we have been told since the times of the Ottomans until today that there is such a thing as an Arab body politic. And there is such a thing for potential Arab revolution against imperialism, against colonialism. We have seen events in history that would suggest that this is a possibility, but the fact that their own brethren have been slaughtered in mass in Gaza, and that yet they carried on with their music festivals, with their celebrations, with life as usual. I don't even know. I think this is too early to even emotionally process this, but I don't think this is going to happen without consequences. Ansarullah, Hezbollah, the Lebanese, the Yemenis, and few others reminded us that there is a pulse. There is a pulse. There is some conscious, there's some collective consciousness there, but not enough to overcome the entire experience. I think for us Palestinians, it was absolutely shocking, disorienting, because Palestinians were counting on this. They thought that there is going to be mass protests. Millions of people will go to the streets and they will surround American embassies and they will do this and that. Very little of that has happened. And therefore, the Arab world proved itself not to be an actual political entity that is able to achieve anything. To the contrary, they actually did their best to ensure that Israel is being fed economically while Ansarullah is holding Israel hostage in the Red Sea. So that they were providing Israel with economic aid, with food, with the toys to their children, while their own brethren are being slaughtered in Gaza. History told us that these kind of events don't just slide by. There would be consequences. I still don't know the nature of these consequences, but from a psychological point of view, two huge events have taken place. Number one, Palestinians have liberated themselves from this idea that they are marginal and unimportant and they are waiting for some liberator to come and save them from somewhere else. They did it all on their own. New powers emerged in the Middle East that proved to be geopolitical factors that nobody had ever anticipated that they would be in that position, especially Ansarullah. But also there is this kind of sense of collective bewilderment among the Arabs. Where do we stand in all of this? You have countries in South America kicking the Israeli ambassadors, and you have the president of Colombia declaring the need for an army that would liberate Palestine, while you have the Israelis being welcomed into Arab capitals as if nothing has happened. Consequences, you bet. There will be huge consequences, I think the nature of which it's just too early to speak about right now, all depending on what's going to happen in the coming days at least.
My final question on media. We have seen during these 2 years, alternate media, for the lack of a better word, or independent media, have broken some of the monopoly that mainstream Western media has held when it comes to the question of Palestinian freedom. Some of that has been broken, although they have been sticking to their own frameworks and languages. Uh, Going forward, what should be our strategy as a global media, as part of this global resistance? What should be our strategy in terms of issues, in terms of language, in terms of frameworks, narratives? What are some of the key themes that we should keep sustaining on?
Absolutely. It's a brilliant question. This is vindicating what's happening right now because, many of us in independent media, independent journalists and podcasters and intellectuals and historians, and we've always been saying the Palestinian narrative and the Palestinian discourse has to be shaped by the Palestinians themselves, and they have to be a priority in how the story of Palestine and Israel is being told globally. Israel has created that atmosphere for us unintentionally, unwittingly, by not allowing international journalists to go to Gaza. So as a result, Gaza's kids learn to be journalists. I get my information on a daily basis from teenagers, from from young people who taught themselves journalism, and they stood with a camera and a mic and they reported on what's happening. And not only we have never been clearer, we have never been clearer regarding what's happening in Gaza. But the global community managed to actually take Israel to the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court and all of that through information produced by the Palestinians themselves in Gaza, to the point that I'm dreading the moment that international media is going to go back to Gaza. I'm dreading the moment the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal is going to have people, because now they are going to start the process of whitewashing and finding that specific Palestinian who's going to tell them exactly what they want to hear. But it means that we have come, I mean, Noam Chomsky would be so proud right now, and I'm sure he is so proud in manufacturing consent, talking about the power of mainstream media and how it creates the entire social and political fabric and global understanding of events. And to actually see that we've changed it, we've beat mainstream media, we've challenged this paradigm, we destroyed it. So now we need to remember independent media should be number one, because it's much harder to control. It's not centralized. It does not come to a single talking point or a single narrative like most American mainstream media is. But we need to invest in Palestinians. We need to invest in young people in Gaza itself to continue to tell the story, to overwhelm the system with information coming from Gaza itself. Let's not shy away talking about the resistance, please. This is not a swear word. People have the right to resist. They ought to resist. If Palestinians didn't resist, they would have vanished by now. So let's talk about the resistance. Let's not create moral equivalences. Let's not try to divide Palestinians to good and bad, radicals and moderates. Let's just try to understand the reality the way it is, and let's invest in Palestinian terminology. Hurriya means freedom. Karama means dignity. Muqawama means resistance. We need to reorient ourselves around Palestinian culture, because it's this culture that has finally defeated one of the most astounding defeats of imperialism in the Middle East, started from one of the poorest, most isolated little stretches of land, and that is the Gaza Strip.
Dr. Baroud, this was an incredible honor to have you on. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.